Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rehab Podcast Weekly. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of neuroplasticity, its core principles, and practical applications.
Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wonder how you can learn a new skill, recover from an injury, or even just, change your habits?
Yeah.
The answer lies in something really fascinating called neuroplasticity. It's like your brain's superpower to rewire itself.
That's a great way to put it. Think of it as your brain constantly remodeling its connections.
Exactly. And today, we're diving deep into this incredible ability. We'll explore not just what it is, but how we as clinicians, doctors, physios, see it in action.
And how we use its principles every day to help people.
It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? For years, the thinking was the brain was pretty much fixed after childhood.
Right, that was the old view.
But now we know it's constantly adapting, all through our lives, responding to, everything we experience.
And that changes everything, really, how we approach learning, rehab, even just personal growth.
Yeah. And to really get a handle on this, we've looked at quite a range of sources, some articles from places like Healthline, Wikipedia,
And also more technical stuff from PubMed, insights from child development resources like Kinderpedia, and definitely the clinical perspective from the American Occupational Therapy Association, the AOTA.
So our mission today is, simple but pretty powerful. Pull out the key insights about how your brain changes.
And crucially, how you can use that knowledge in your life for your health.
Okay, let's get into it then.
So, at its core, neuroplasticity. It's the brain's amazing capacity to change its structure and function, forming new connections, strengthening old ones, reorganizing things.
And it's so important to stress this isn't just a kid thing.
No, absolutely not. I mean, yes, young brains are incredibly plastic, super adaptable, but your adult brain, it still has a significant ability to rewire itself.
It's such a fundamental shift. The idea of plasticity itself actually goes way back. William James used it in the late 1800s, talking about behavior being molded by experience.
That's right. And the term neuroplasticity, that was likely Jerzy Konorski, a neuroscientist, but it's fascinating, even earlier, late 1700s. An Italian anatomist, Malacarne.
Malacarne, really? What did he find?
He did these experiments training animals, and he actually saw physical differences in their brains. The trained animals had bigger cerebellums. It was an early hint, but sort of forgotten for ages.
Wow, that's incredible. And then much later, Marion Diamond's work in the 60s provided real anatomical proof.
Yeah, it took a while for the idea of a physically changing brain to really take hold in science.
Okay, so how does this change actually happen? You mentioned structure and function.
Right. So we talk about structural neuroplasticity. That means actual physical changes. Changes in the connections between neurons, the brain cells.
Like the wiring itself changing.
Exactly. And it even includes creating new neurons throughout life, which is, pretty remarkable. We can even see some of these changes with scans like MRI or CT, looking at gray matter or how strong the synapses, the connections are.
So that's like upgrading the brain's hardware. What about functional neuroplasticity? Is that more the software side?
Precisely. Functional neuroplasticity is how the brain reorganizes its functions, adapts how it works. So one example is homologous area adaptation. If one part gets damaged, a similar area on the other side might take over.
Oh, okay. Like a backup system.
Sort of, yeah. Another is map expansion. Brain areas for skills you use a lot can actually get bigger. Think about a musician's fingers and the brain area controlling them.
Right, dedicating more processing power to it.
Exactly. Then there's cross-modal reassignment. This is really interesting. A brain area that normally handles one sense, say vision, might start processing another if the first sense is lost.
Like in blindness, the visual cortex might process sound or touch.
Precisely that. And we also see compensatory masquerade the brain using different strategies or pathways to get a task done if the usual way is blocked.
So the brain is always problem-solving, finding workarounds.
Constantly optimizing. And within functional plasticity, we can also talk about activity-dependent plasticity that changes from learning, like memory formation.
And the flip side, maladaptive plasticity.
Yeah, that's when the brain's attempt to compensate actually causes problems, like sometimes in chronic pain conditions.
Okay. And you mentioned synapses.
Yeah.
Those connections between neurons.
Right, synaptic plasticity. That's about strengthening or weakening those connections. LTP long-term potentiation makes them stronger, like turning a path into a highway. Important for memory.
And LTD, long-term depression.
That weakens connections, helps prune pathways we don't use. There's also intrinsic plasticity changes in how easily individual neurons fire.
So it's happening at multiple levels, from individual cells to whole networks.
Exactly. And the AOTA, the American Occupational Therapy Association, they've outlined some really useful principles for how to actually induce these changes, especially relevant in rehab settings.
Okay, so what are the key takeaways for encouraging brain change? The practical rules.
Well, the first one is pretty intuitive. Use it or lose it. If you don't use certain neural circuits, they can degrade.
Makes sense.
Conversely, use it and improve it. Specific training drives specific brain changes.
Right. Practice makes perfect, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. But specificity is key too. The type of training dictates the type of change.
Like we said, practicing piano won't help your tennis serve.
Exactly. Then repetition matters. You need enough practice for changes to stick.
Can't just do it once.
Nope. And intensity matters. The training needs to be challenging enough to actually stimulate adaptation.
Push yourself a bit.
Right. And time matters. Different kinds of plasticity happen at different stages of learning or recovery. It's not all immediate.
Okay, so timing is important too.
Definitely. And maybe one of the most important for therapy is salience matters.
Salience, meaning...
Meaning the training has to be important, relevant, meaningful to the person.
Yeah.
If a stroke survivor wants to cook again, therapy involving cooking tasks will be much more powerful because it matters to them.
Ah, that makes total sense. The motivation factor.
Huge factor. Then age matters. As we said, plasticity happens throughout life, but it's generally more pronounced when we're younger.
Still happens in adults, though.
Absolutely. Then there's transference. Changes in one circuit can sometimes help related circuits or functions.
Oh, interesting. So training one thing might have broader benefits.
Sometimes, yes. And this is related to why we sometimes use tools like TMS or TDCS, transcranial stimulation techniques. They can potentially enhance the brain's readiness to change with therapy.
Like giving the plasticity process a little boost.
Kind of, yeah. But there's also interference. Sometimes one type of plasticity can actually hinder another.
How so?
Well, imagine someone learns an awkward way to move after an injury, a compensatory strategy. That pattern, being plastic itself, might make it harder to relearn the correct movement later on.
Ah, so you can practically learn unhelpful things too.
Unfortunately, yes. It's about encouraging the right kind of plasticity.
Okay, so we have these principles. Now let's talk real-world examples. How does this help people recover from, say, brain damage?
Yeah, this is where it gets really compelling. The brain's ability to reorganize after a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, it's just fundamental neuroplasticity in action.
And we're seeing things now we didn't think possible before, right? Like with vision.
Exactly. We used to think things like binocular vision had a really strict critical period in childhood. But now we see adults with amblyopia, lazy eye, or convergence issues making real gains with vision therapy. It shows the adult visual system can still adapt.
That's fantastic. And what about phantom limbs? That's always seemed like such a clear, if strange, example of brain adaptation.
It really is. The sensation, and especially phantom limb pain, seems to come from the brain areas that used to control the missing limb becoming, well, active, maybe getting input from neighboring areas in the cortex. Research, like Herta Floor's work, links the intensity of phantom pain to how much that cortical map has reorganized.
So the brain map is sort of scrambling, looking for input.
That's one way to think about it. And some experiments, like those by Lorimer Moseley, are amazing people, can learn to mentally move their phantom limb in ways that would be physically impossible. It just highlights how flexible the brain's body representation is.
Wow. The brain creating its own reality.
Yeah.
You also mentioned chronic pain involves maladaptive plasticity. Can you expand on that?
Sure. In chronic pain, the nervous system itself can become hypersensitive. It's not just about tissue damage anymore. The brain and spinal cord actually change, amplifying pain signals. We see this in conditions like complex regional pain syndrome or CRPS.
What kinds of changes?
Well, sometimes the brain map, the cortical representation of the painful limb, can actually shrink. We can also see reductions in gray matter volume in certain brain areas involved in pain processing.
That sounds quite serious.
It is, but the encouraging part is that these changes aren't always permanent. With the right treatment, things like graded motor imagery, physiotherapy, certain medications, these maladaptive changes can often be reversed and the pain can decrease.
So the brain can be retrained out of chronic pain patterns too. That's hopeful.
Very hopeful, yes.
Okay, let's shift to sensory adaptations. You mentioned deafness earlier. What happens in the brain then?
Right. So in individuals who are deaf, The auditory cortex, the part that usually processes sound, doesn't just sit idle. It often undergoes cross-modal plasticity.
Meaning it takes on new jobs.
Exactly. It starts processing information from other senses, especially vision and touch. This might be why some deaf individuals show enhanced visual attention, particularly in the periphery, or better motion detection. They might also be more sensitive to vibrations.
The brain reallocating resources. Makes sense.
It's incredibly efficient.
And cochlear implants. How does neuroplasticity fit in there?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. A cochlear implant stimulates the auditory nerve directly. The brain then has to learn to interpret these entirely new electrical signals as meaningful sound.
It must take time.
It does, and there's a critical period, especially for kids born deaf. Implanting early gives the brain, while it's still highly plastic, the best chance to adapt and develop pathways for spoken language.
Highlighting that timing principle again. What about blindness? Similar compensatory changes?
Yes, very similar mechanisms. The visual cortex in blind individuals can become active during tasks using other senses, like reading Braille, or even processing complex sounds.
Does it mean other senses automatically get sharper?
Well, the evidence is a bit mixed. Some studies suggest enhancements, others maybe not across the board, or even some trade-offs in certain spatial tasks. But one really striking example is human echolocation.
Using clicks to sense surroundings.
Exactly. Some blind individuals become incredibly skilled at this, and brain imaging shows their visual cortex lighting up when they echolocate. They're essentially seeing with sound thanks to neuroplasticity repurposing that brain area.
That is just incredible. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. What about practices like meditation? Lots of interest there. Does that change the brain?
There's certainly growing evidence pointing that way. Long-term meditation practice seems to be associated with structural changes.
Like what?
Studies have found increased gray matter density, thicker brain tissue in areas important for learning, memory, like the hippocampus, and also in the frontal cortex, which is key for attention, self-awareness, decision-making.
So meditating might literally build up parts of your brain.
It appears so. There's also evidence for increased cortical thickness overall and changes in brainwave activity, like gamma synchrony, suggesting more efficient brain communication. It supports the idea that consistent mental training reshapes the brain.
Wow. So our thoughts and focus can have physical consequences in the brain. What about creative activities? Art, music?
Oh, absolutely. Engaging in art, creating music, these stimulate the brain in really unique ways. They can foster new neural pathways, strengthen existing ones. Music therapy, for instance, it shows real promise for promoting neuroplasticity. It can help with cognitive decline in older adults, improve movement after stroke, coordination, even speech and memory. Specific approaches like music-supported therapy have shown measurable changes in the motor cortex of stroke patients.
And benefits for healthy people, too.
Yes, some studies show it enhances brain structure, like cerebellar gray matter and auditory working memory, even in healthy older adults.
So these aren't just hobbies, they're brain workouts.
You could definitely see them that way.
Okay, what about physical exercise? We know it's good for the body, but the brain?
Huge impact on the brain. Regular exercise seems to significantly enhance neuroplasticity. It might even help protect against diseases like Alzheimer's.
How does it do that?
A key player seems to be BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Okay.
Think of it like fertilizer for your neurons. It helps them grow, survive, and form new connections. Exercise, especially aerobic exercise, boosts BDNF levels.
And that leads to?
Better cognition, improved mood, enhanced learning, and memory. Exercise, particularly stuff that gets your heart rate up, seems really good for executive functions planning, organizing, problem solving. It might even increase gray matter volume in key areas like the hippocampus.
It really sounds like exercise is crucial for a healthy, adaptable brain.
It seems to be, yes.
Now, thinking about learning in general school, new skills, neuroplasticity must be fundamental there.
Absolutely. Learning is neuroplasticity in action. It's a physical process. New connections form, existing ones strengthen. That's how information gets encoded.
And this understanding is changing education too, right? This idea of a growth mindset.
Exactly. Promoting the idea that abilities aren't fixed, that your brain can change and grow with effort, is hugely motivating for students, helps them persevere through challenges because they believe they can get smarter, get better.
So every new thing learned, every new place visited, it's all contributing.
It all shapes the brain. Stepping outside your comfort zone literally helps build a more flexible, adaptable brain, fosters creativity too.
Amazing. What about right at the start of life? Early childhood.
That's a period of just explosive plasticity. A child's brain is incredibly dynamic, constantly shaped by experiences, environment, culture, everything from birth onwards.
Are there different kinds then?
Yeah, researchers talk about different categories in kids: adaptive plasticity, normal development from typical experiences, but also impaired plasticity, excessive, and plasticity related to injury or difference.
Can we harness it early on?
Yes, for example, musical training in young kids. Studies show structural brain changes can happen in as little as, say, 15 months. It suggests potential for interventions for developmental disorders using activities that drive positive plasticity.
That rapid change is just remarkable. Okay, we've covered so much. Recovery, senses, meditation, exercise, learning. Even aging doesn't stop it entirely, right?
Not at all. While the rate might slow compared to childhood, the adult brain absolutely retains significant capacity for change. We see it when people learn a second language. Studies show changes in white matter connectivity.
Wow.
We see it in developing new treatments for things like depression, which often involve promoting neuroplasticity. Even in the animal kingdom, birds that hide food show seasonal changes in their hippocampus size. It's everywhere.
And now even merging with technology.
Yeah.
Transhumanism, body hacking.
Yeah, that's another fascinating area, using tech to augment senses like vests that turn sound into vibration patterns on the skin. The brain learns to interpret these new inputs. Advanced prosthetics that provide sensory feedback. It all relies on the brain's ability to adapt to novel information streams.
It just underscores how incredibly adaptable our wiring is.
It really does. So, to wrap up the core idea, neuroplasticity is this fundamental lifelong ability of our brains to change. Structure, function, the works.
And it impacts pretty much everything. Learning, recovery, how we perceive the world, our mood.
Everything. Understanding these principles, use it or lose it, specificity, repetition, salience, all of them gives us powerful tools.
Tools for optimizing learning, improving rehabilitation, fostering our own growth.
Exactly. It puts some control back in our hands, you could say.
So here's maybe a final thought for everyone listening. How might consciously seeking out new experiences, challenging your routines, how might that be actively shaping your brain right now?
Yeah, what possibilities does that open up for your future, for your well-being? Maybe think about one of the things we discussed today: exercise, learning something new, mindfulness.
And consider how you could consciously engage that process in your own life. It's happening anyway, but maybe we can guide it a bit.
That's the potential, yes. Food for thought.
Edited by Min.Rehab. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next podcast.